Literally and figuratively.
So we're back, everyone, to Senate Education this Friday afternoon, talking about literacy, and we are going to focus now, shift on the focus on Senator Gulick's bill, S204, an act relating to reading assessment and intervention. Senator Gulick's going to say a few words about the bill, and then we'll go to Ms. Carmoli, Ms. Gardner-Morse, and Dr. Dorfman, giving everyone, 5 to 10 minutes to say their piece on it. But it's a great bill. So please.
Yes, thanks. Thank you so much. And that's Senator Williams. I am really humbled by the amount of brain power that's in the room and was online. And I'm so thankful to Gwen Carmoli for being here, and Dr. Dorfman and Cynthia Gardner-Morse. And honestly, really great reporting done by 7 Days not too long ago about literacy in Vermont. So shout out.
Oh, I didn't know that we had. Are you the author of the?
Yes.
And your name?
Allison Novak.
Nice to meet you. Yeah. Good to meet you. Glad you're here.
So just briefly, my interest in literacy started like with so many people went with my own children. One who took to reading really, really quickly, naturally, and another who was a little bit slower to become a reader. So that was sort of where it started. Later in my career as a high school teacher, I taught a course called On the Path, which was I co-taught a course. It was an English course, and it was meant to really assist kids who didn't fit in with the traditional curriculum. So we took students who needed something a little bit different. Well, one thing that I noticed right off the bat was that there was a very serious lack of engagement with students who struggled to read. And that was really clear to me, as well as just behaviors that were not, necessarily easy to work with as a teacher. So that became clear to me. I was also a librarian for 10 years and got to see all kinds of behaviors and struggles with reading as well there. So I have a little bit of a background. I am by no means a literacy expert. We have those folks here today. And I also enjoyed my time on the Literacy Advisory Council, which was really interesting, and I learned a lot. So I want to follow up on what was said with Jess and Emily. And just say that when I look at this bill, I think it actually plays really well and interacts really well with a lot of the work that's already being done. So I'm really excited about that. If I were, queen, I probably would want to have a reading program that was statewide. I think that would be, really beneficial. I know that I've heard that it would be $29 million, would be very costly. But one of the things that I looked at as I was doing my research was the cost of illiteracy, right, in our country, which, the Barbara Bush Foundation puts it as high as $2.2 trillion a year. The World Literacy Foundation puts it at more like $300 billion. I don't have a number for Vermont, but that would be fascinating to have. But the costs are great. So it may be something to think about, and maybe an investment that pays dividends. The World Literacy Foundation, and I'll share this with you all if you want to look at it, but it also breaks down some of the, economic, what happens, in terms of economics when you've got a high level of illiteracy, lost earnings and limited employability, lost business productivity, lost wealth creation for individuals and businesses, lower technological skills capacity, and then it also details social, what are some of the social terms of illiteracy, and it goes on to talk about health, crime. There's actually a very strong coalition between crime and illiteracy, welfare, and education and the role of family in terms of like expectations and so on. So I can share this with folks to take a look at, but it's important to kind of frame what we're trying to do here in terms of social and economic outcomes, as well as just, you know, allowing folks to engage in our democracy, which is a participatory team sport, and we need folks to be able to participate.
I think you even said, I mean, suspensions and expulsions, you know, for kids that cannot read at grade level are much higher. Yeah, which ends up, as we know from this committee, people go right into, end up in law enforcement related kinds of incidents and end up in prison.
So this is not a comprehensive retooling of our reading program here in Vermont. This is a very targeted bill with a targeted approach that would screen, and we heard a little bit about universal screeners from Jess, and it was good to hear that 80% of, it sounds like, schools are using screeners, which is super. And so
no, 80% of those who, how did she say? I want to make sure it's not 80% of our schools, I don't think. It's, and this is one of the problems, it's those that participate in some ways. And that's where my concern continues to lie. If you're a high needs school, if you're really struggling for all sorts of things, are you able to engage in these kinds of things, or are you being left behind?
Great. Okay. Yeah, maybe someone can clarify that, but I must have misheard it. But in any case, this would require that school districts and the agency of ed approve a certain number of universal reading screeners for schools, independent schools as well as public schools to use. And it really focuses on kindergarten to grade 3. And why kindergarten to grade 3 is important is because that's when you're learning to read, and after grade 3, you're actually using reading to learn. And so if by that point you haven't learned how to read, it's really going to start setting you back. So, and I'm sure our experts will speak more to that, but I just wanted to mention that that is a critical period of time. I think you all know, everyone in this room knows, I don't like to add extra burden to school districts, and I certainly don't like to add extra burden to the AOE. But again, you know, this is, it's at a point now where we have 2/3 of our students who are not proficient by grade 3. It's a crisis, and I just feel as though, you know, this came from a really wanting to take bold action. And really write these numbers. And I did, to what we were talking about yesterday with the governor's address, I did think about that. And I think what he may have been referring to, or you and I were talking about, was that there was a time when we were second in the nation for literacy. And now we are in the middle of the pack. National score is 216, we're at 217.
No, and this, frankly, is what compelled this committee 2 years ago to pass Act 28. I mean, a lot of this is not new. We know that the state has been struggling. No question about it. Yeah. So I'll just really quickly go through the bill. So the universal screeners, kindergarten through grade 3. So this would be when you identify a student who is showing a substantial reading disability or deficiency, I should say, excuse me, that there would be, you know, very targeted intervention for those students. And it would also just require that there be notification to families about the reading deficiencies. And then there would also be some reporting performance data to the agency on a yearly basis. So the first part of the bill, you see the definitions. You also see that the screeners should be made available or published by June 1st, 2025. So it does give, you know, a year and a half for that work to be done. And then it goes on to very specifics about what we should see in those universal screeners, everything from phonemic awareness to oral reading proficiency, etc. And do I have access? It's on.
It's on. Yeah. And then with the help of Dr. Dorfman, the bill goes into some specifics about the dyslexia screener, which shall, for example, measure rapid automatized naming, RAN, a battery of phonological awareness tasks, including phoneme segmentation, etc. And then the timing, which is really, really important, the screener, shall be given, the universal screener shall be given in the first 30 days after the start of school. It's really important to identify students early on so that they can get the assistance and supports that they need. And then it would be repeated at mid-year and then again at the end of the year to try to mark progress. I already mentioned that it's kindergarten through third grade. And then students who do exhibit substantial deficiencies would, this is on page 4, would have an independent reading plan, and that is defined and laid out fairly clearly in the bill as well. And as well as, you know, what's included in the plan. So, and I'm not gonna read through those, but you all can see that when you take a look at the bill online. So the reading instructional and intervention programs identified pursuant to subsection D, which you talked about, this section shall not include those. So it also goes into what should not be included in the in these screeners. For example, the 3 cueing system model of reading, visual memory is a primary basis for teaching, etc. And if any of you have, you know, done any reading or listened to any podcasts about literacy, you probably heard about the 3 cueing system and visual memory, etc. ways that have been used to try to teach reading. So then the written notification piece is in here as well. And yeah, and then just, you know, making sure that there's a plan in place and that families are abreast of what's happening with their child's progress in literacy. And yeah, so I think those are the main points. Beth can probably take us through a more detailed version when she comes back. But the bill ends with a statement of policy as well and an effective date, which would be July 1st of 2024.
So how does this screen, if I may, compare to what AOE just took us through? How is it? Tell us a little bit about the differences.
Well,
is this mostly, would you say, looking for, I know we heard some testimony a few years ago, specifically for dyslexia and disabilities?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So it's very specific to those 2 things.
Yeah,
so
and I think this gives more structure.
Yeah.
It gives a system, right, to
those early years.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Great.
Yep, so instead of kind of a haphazard hit or miss, and that I'm not saying that that's what's happening now, but
how
really
are kids though identified now to have dyslexia?
That's a good question, and hopefully Dr. Dorfman can speak to that when she comes up, or maybe even Gwen can speak to that.
Well, I would say, I think that's more on the special education, and I would say generally we have screeners in place. We do follow-up assessment that includes diagnostic assessment, and then sometimes it turns into an individualized education plan.
Sure.
And we're also in the middle of multi-tiered systems of support, so we're implementing a lot of new things. So I think special education could probably answer that better than I could. I might speak about too generally.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll give it a
like
shot.
I would too. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Welcome, Gwen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. So I wear a few different hats. My name is Gwen Carmoli. I'm Director of Curriculum here in Colchester. I serve as the President of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders, and I serve as the Chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy. And I am really pleased that there's so much interest and focus on literacy right now. And it really, a lot of that has come from your committee. So thank you so much for this. When I read through the bill, I saw so much that I agree with. I want to speak to that. And there are a couple of areas that I wanted to highlight that I would wonder about.
And I just want to say one thing in respect to my former colleagues, and not that we have bad journalism ever, but remember, Act 28 is something that I want to give credit to those that were here before. This isn't completely new to us. Senator Lyons sat here, Senator Perchlik, a lot of people around the table, and that seems to be getting a little bit lost
Okay.
in the narrative. So I just want to say this isn't new.
Yeah,
We've been working really hard on this issue. And
yeah.
I think Vermonters should know that.
And I am so grateful
Absolutely,
for
yeah,
all of that,
right,
the
right.
history that's led up to this and the effort that's happening right now. And
And we're starting to see some progress.
we are seeing
Right.
a lot of progress actually, which I think is going to turn into some results. We're seeing some initial, on the local level, results that are growing in skills for sure. I think when it comes to the Vermont Comprehensive Assessment System and NAEP, I don't know when we're going to start to see those, but I know locally I started to see them within a year. So
Great.
I can say from my own systems
Huge.
end, I was really excited about that. I would say last year when I was here, and I will speak a little more about it when I come on Tuesday, you would ask what is happening across the state. And I was saying there's a lot of work that's in progress. And between last year and this year, I would say it's been an accelerated effort. And it not only went from effort at the Agency of Education, but it's happening in almost every supervisory union and district and school that I'm hearing about. People are working on curriculum, they're working on instructional materials, they're doing trainings, they're changing structures and supports. A ton of work is happening. So between last year and this year, I see a lot of evidence of that. On the bill end, I appreciate the alignment with multi-tiered systems of support, particularly in that screening for all. And school systems are putting these screeners in place. And I think it would be very helpful, and my curriculum colleagues would say this, having a list of approved screeners will help. But be aware, some have just put screeners in place. And if that is not on the approved list, they're going to have to figure out how to make an adjustment.
Okay, yeah, please jump in.
Are my colleagues, are you feeling good about multi-tiered systems of support? Or do you feel like you want a quick?
Yeah, why don't you give a quick overview?
Summary.
Yeah, that'd be great, yeah.
Sure. So it's a system of layers of intervention, layers or tiers of intervention that says this is what's in place for all students. Then when a student is struggling, what supports would be in place for some, and then when someone is really struggling, what's a more intensive intervention. And along the way, we're doing progress monitoring to make sure that the efforts that we're adding more onto and different are making a difference. And when they're not, we intensify that. And so it includes a screener, it includes progress monitoring, it includes very clear grade level standards or course standards, lots of assessments, lots of small group instruction. And so multi-tiered systems of support is sort of this really big, broad piece, but it's about providing the supports that are needed. Having a universal screener would be very helpful. And then having a follow-up screener that is looking for particular areas of difficulty, like a dyslexia screener, can be incredibly important also. So I think that was important, that the screening for all and then that follow-up screener. As I read through, I could tell that, but I wasn't sure. That you may need to clarify that part a little bit. The data collection I think is really, really helpful, especially for the primary grades for a number of reasons. It's when early literacy is happening, the foundations of literacy. It's also the years we don't have a Vermont statewide assessment. So we really need to know, and it would be very helpful to have those clear benchmarks and then that data collection. So I thought that was really helpful, fits in with the work that we're having. The focus on the reading by third grade, that is an international goal, it's a national goal, state goal, our state literacy plan has it. So there were so many pieces there. Also, the fact that evidence-based is reflected in here. Thank you, that was really helpful. The questions I had were about, there was the reading improvement plan, I love that, and yet some school systems who have been developing multi-tiered systems of support might be calling it something else, an intervention plan. Or, so you may, if there could be some flexibility in that and not adding a new plan on top of that, that would be something I would think about. On the last page, it says, systematic, explicit, direct, sequential, cumulative. When you go inside the evidence, it says systematic explicit and systematic. I would use the language that comes out of the evidence as to make things line up. That's a recommendation I would make.
In the statement of policy?
All students on line 2 on the last page, all students need to receive systematic, explicit. There were some additional words in there, direct, sequential, cumulative. The evidence, when you spend time inside the CIDAR IES practice guides for the foundational skills, the National Reading Panel, they use the language explicit and systematic.
And may I just ask, Senator Gould, what do you mean by explicit, direct, sequential, cumulative? Can you give me an example?
I'm going to let my reading experts
Oh,
give you
okay.
examples of that.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you. Explicit and
Systematic. That's the language that, and is the CIDAR is the U.S. Office of Special Education.
Okay.
IES is the What-Works Clearinghouse, which is the international Institute of Educational Sciences. Thank you. They do the meta-analyses. National Reading Panel was the big meta-analysis. So just lining up, I think, can help and strengthen the bill. And then I wondered, there was a section about the plan and the supports, and I just wondered if you could do a crosswalk with the special education division at AOE, just to
Sure.
make sure. I don't know, that's not my area of expertise, and I don't know if that is duplicative or there are alignments or misalignments there. I mean, to me it fits, but I might check with the special education.
those are great suggestions. Thank you.
I just want to give a little comment to the NAEP. On the NAEP in grade 4, we are 7th in the country. In 8th grade, we are 6th in the country. So sometimes it's misunderstood. No, we are right about at the national average in 4th grade. We are one of, I believe, 6 states that sit above the national average in the 8th grade. We are a slightly different profile. Now, our scores have slightly declined. I would say the last 6 years there's been a decline, a national decline. Yes, I'm not saying there's plenty of work to do in this area, but I want to contextualize for us that Vermont does very well. In the states that I get very, very interested in, Massachusetts, Colorado, they both sit in the top. New Jersey, left from middle of the pack, they're now in the top in both 4th grade and 5th grade. I'm very curious what those states are doing. So
Yes,
those are the states I watch a lot.
Yeah, so what was it that the governor was referring to? And then also, I think in the 7 days piece, looking at the NAEP, it sounded like our score was 216, or no, we're 217 and the national score is 216.
I think it was the decline. It's the decline that's happened over the last 6 years. That's happening in every state right now. People are reading less, students are reading less, and it is, well, something is happening in our reading scores. There is a concern that we are not teaching explicitly and systematically enough. We may not be providing enough support. That's part of a theory of action. And another theory of action is we need to do more reading altogether.
Yeah.
Evidence says code and meaning is really important in teaching reading from the beginning, and you have to get both. And if we only do one or the other, we're missing too much. And sometimes we fall a little too far on either side. We cannot ignore code at the beginning of reading. We also cannot ignore meaning.
So while you're still there, so you're identifying folks who have dyslexia and dysgraphia. And
or other
okay,
deficiencies.
okay,
It doesn't have to be just those two.
okay.
Yeah.
So what would be another deficiency? So I know.
I'm gonna let the experts speak.
Okay, all right. Did you?
I thank you. I'm going to come back in a couple of days.
Okay.
I'll let you know more about the council's work. Please let me know ahead of time if there are things that you'd like to hear.
Great, but those were your only suggestions?
Over.
Great,
All
okay,
right,
terrific,
thank you.
that's great. Ms. Gardner-Morse, nice to see you back.
Thank you, Senator Campion, for inviting me back. I'm happy to work with I noticed that some of the people who signed on to the bill are people who have been in this room before, and I'm not surprised, but I'm glad to see that they've had a lot of good signs, good interest. So I'm going to have my bag here. been sitting still for a while. Thought it might be an idea to start with an activity. We've been talking about statistics.
And just so you know, you have about 10 minutes.
I'll
Okay.
be,
Thank you.
give me a 3-minute, maybe give me a
Perfect.
5-minute warning, and yes, I will. It can be pretty abstract, get a sense of, what it looks like, the reading problems that we're having in the state. And so I brought some graphs with me, which I think help.
Great.
Go this way, so this way, I'll hand it back this way. Someone's bringing
Sure,
to
did you get one? Here, go ahead. Senator
I
Williams.
have 10 copies, so you can figure out how you're gonna sort them out. If you look at page 1, you will see that we have 9% of our students who are proficient. Who are at advanced. Then we have 25% who are at proficient. If you add those together, that's where you get 34%.
Uh-huh.
You will also see that we have a total of 66% who are below proficient. And of those, a third of our population is reading below basic. That means they're essentially non-readers. What would that look like if we had a group of 10 kids? I'm gonna hand out some cards, and I'd like people to take a card, and I'll only give you 10 of you, and then I'll tell you what to do. The marks on the cards do mean something. I thought you've been sitting still for a while, and I thought it might be an idea to stand up.
Thank you. Oh, you want us to stand?
I would like you to stand up. And if you have a 1 on your card, slash, I'd like you to hold your hand up in the air. Because you represent the people who are reading above proficient. And if you have an X, I'd like you to put your hands across your chest like this because you are reading below basic, below proficient. And if you look around the room, you'll visually see that a lot of our people have X's across their hearts. And it does affect people's lives. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Let me just find my notes. Thank you for the visual. I thought it would be helpful to start with that. Now that I have my notes, I should have said that I am speaking for myself, not as a Literacy Council member. Gwen did a great job doing that with us. I'm here to represent, as a concerned citizen, representing families and particularly representing children in our state who are struggling with reading. And as you see from this chart, from your X's, it's a lot of our children that are struggling. This is a problem not only for Vermont's public schools, but also for our private schools. Reading affects all subjects, including math. You might think, oh, I can do math, it's just numbers. Well, many of numbers are word problems. Many math books have directions. Algebra books have lots of words in them. If you can't read, you're at a loss for getting that information out of it. So reading is a life skill, and in the law here, there's a no, it's from the other folder.
You're
Sorry.
talking about.
I'm talking about
or
X, I'm
this
talking
one?
about
The bill. that's your
23?
28?
No, I'm not talking about X 28. I'm talking about, I'm not gonna be mysterious, let me find it. It says that how important reading is. The state statute. It is a state statute, it is statute 2903. And in the statement of policy about that, I'll hand this out to folks in a second. The ability to read, we've already recognized here in Vermont, is critical to success in learning. Children who fail to read by the end of first grade will likely fall further behind in school. The personal and economic costs of reading failure are enormous, both while a student remains in school and long afterwards, as Senator Gulab was telling us. A lot of people, it really affects people's lives. So that's why we want all students to receive systematic reading instruction in the early grades from a teacher who's skilled in teaching reading. I want to make it clear that Vermont teachers love their children and work really hard. This reading crisis is not the fault of teachers. It's the fault of the entire system. It's the fault of our teacher training programs. And there are things that we can do about that based on research. So, and the reason I had you all stand up is the DMG report came out 7 years ago. I have a grandson who's now 2 weeks old. If we wait another 7 years, he'll be getting well into this period and he should have learned to read. And already the people, when the DMG report came out, those people, if they were in first grade and now in seventh grade, they've completely missed the best window to learn how to read. So this is a crisis and we really need to be on top of it. I'm really glad to see this legislation being it wouldn't be too distracting and enhancing these outcomes. But I'm going to encourage you to read more about them later. It's got a little introduction about who I am. I don't know if I said I'm Cynthia Gardner Morse, but native Vermonter, grew up in a farmhouse, attended one-room schools in Calais, and I trained as a teacher at the University of Vermont to teach elementary students. And I taught primary school in some little rural schools, and the people in my classroom, one of the teachers in my classroom, one teacher was doing a great job with the bottom third of my class. She was really doing, frankly, better than I was with the middle third of my class. And I wanted to know why. So I applied to get my master's at Harvard and studied under Jean Shaw. Jean Shaw is a person who said in the first 3 grades we're learning how to read. In the next part of our schooling, we're reading to learn. And so that's why we need to have that mastered by the end of 3rd grade.
And Ms. Gardner Morse, just so you know, what we would love you to do is tell us if you have any concerns about S204. This is just the start of a long, long conversation about literacy. We have 2 other bills having to do with literacy, so we're happy to have you back in.
Okay.
But on S204, full support, are there any tweaks, anything that you think, the one tweet we just heard, for example, from Ms. Carmoli was not really even a tweet, just sort of take a look with special education
Yes.
folks, make sure we're, some language things. But generally, I left thinking moving in the right direction.
Generally, I think we are moving
Okay.
in the right direction.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
So the solution, well, actually, I want to do one more thing. I brought some more cards. I'm going to hand out more of these cards and I want more of you to stand up. When people say that Vermont is above average in reading and that we're doing really well in reading, what we're failing to say is that, failing to note is that half of our students are not learning how to read. And that of those students, the people who are most at risk are really not doing well in reading. And I'd like you to look at the chart on page 6 of the
Yeah.
colorful handout that I gave you. This chart, we'll have a look at, no, the colorful one, this one. No, got it. Yours is flipped to it. I think that's what I was intending to read, but that's okay. If I could just look at page 6 with you. This is a chart of 2020 grade 4 scores for reading achievement level. And you can see if you stand up again for those cards that we've got, I rounded up, we've got one person who can stand up that they're reading at proficient. These are the kids that are most at risk. They might be Korean English taught lunch, they might be of a different culture. For some reason, they're categorized in this group that tends to have challenges. And then you can see that 94% are below proficient. So if you stand up, if you've got a 1, you can put your hand right in the air. You are really lucky because you're almost successful, 6%. If you've got a slash under the 1, if you've got an X, I want you to cross your arms. If you've got a minus underneath it, that'll be 8 of you, 8 of these 10 people. That means that you are reading at below basic, even though you've been on special education for a long time and you've been getting the help that we think you need. We're not serving those kids well, and that's the point I want to make. Why are we not doing that? Well, if you turn over on the colorful chart, page 7, most Vermont students with specific learning disabilities are not getting services until after they're in first grade. And if you look at the red, we don't get children identified until they're in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade frequently. You also see that their behaviors, emotional disturbance is blue in there. You can see that emotional disturbance goes up, and as emotional disturbance goes up, we get more and more students who are identified as having reading problems. So I think if we can turn this around, we're going to have better behavior in our schools, and we'll have more students who are proficient at their reading. There are more things on this chart that I will leave. I hope you'll really take a good look at them. It compares the 2 tests that were given, and it shows that combinations report card, we're not doing that well. I don't know if I said if you've got a minus, and I'd like you to put your head down, fold your head down, because the people with a minus, which is nearly all of that group, are gonna have their heads down for the rest of their lives. When they go in to look for work, they aren't gonna be able to read the forms to fill out. They go to the doctor's office. It says, does your family have a history of, it's gonna take a long time to read that, and you may have to ask the nurse to read it to you.
So I'll ask you this, as I will with Dr. Dorfman, you both are leaders in this area. Why is it happening? What has happened? Has there been something that, what's the explanation? I mean,
There's a section in here that says, you asked me what I thought of this. There's a section in here that says we should not be using the 3 cueing system. The 3 cueing system teaches children to guess either by the pictures or by the first letter. Reading is not guessing.
Right.
Reading is using the letters without any pictures.
So we've used that system in Vermont for too long. That
Yes,
is,
and
if somebody's,
it was really pushed about
Okay.
7 years ago, which is about when our scores began to be
okay,
a lot worse. And there are organizations in the state who are great about providing books to kids.
Yep.
But who believe if you read to kids, they're gonna figure out how to read. And that simply isn't true. Some of those children will, but there's a large population that won't learn how to spell very well from that. And there's about 20% kids who might have dyslexia that will not learn to read unless we use these structured methods. But our teachers don't know how to teach them.
Yep.
So we need to help our teachers learn how to do that. That's where teacher funding.
That's very helpful.
Cynthia, thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah, thanks.
It's really, really
Yeah.
nice.
He also has them, and I hope they've come through in color on the
They
one
did.
that he's
Thank you
posted
so
online.
much.
So, in the DMG report, we talked about teacher training. As I said, that was
Yeah.
7 years ago. That is too long. We need to be on this. I'm so glad
right.
they
And
are.
as you know, we heard from teachers 2 years ago that came to this committee, brave teachers that said they do not know how to teach reading and writing.
They did, and they mentioned that in that report too.
Right. And that's hopefully, and we'll get some of that feedback because our responsibility, of course, our authorities over the State College, the University of Vermont, also maybe a little bit over
So
our.
I've met with some of those leaders, I'm not gonna name the institution,
Yeah.
but they said, yeah, this is a great idea. It's gonna take us about 10 years to turn it around, and I'm looking at my grandchild who's gonna be 10 years old before the teachers get into the program. He's gonna be 14, he'll be halfway through high school before those people can teach him.
Well, thank you. I do need to hear from Dr.
Yeah,
Dorfman because I
thank
don't
you
want to
very
miss
much.
her
I just,
testimony. And we'll leave it there. Dr.
You
Dorfman.
can send us anything else you've got.
I think you've got everything.
Yeah.
Thank you for being willing to stand up
Thank you.
and bow your
You know,
head.
it felt good, honestly. Do it more often.
Thank you. I don't need those cards back if they end up
Okay.
going to. Move the folders, but I got some of them. What I didn't get to go over is some of the things that were specific in there, what phonemic awareness is and the parts of that. I've got a test that assesses that. I'll hand it out as a paper, but if people have questions about any of this, please let me know.
Thank you so much.
Here you go. This is a copy of my remarks. I am not much of an actress, so I really need to read. So my apologies, but I did bring along the report that I published online last spring about recommendations for Northern New England from Mississippi, where I had visited last spring. And I will begin.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
I really
Fulbright
appreciate
Scholar
it.
right there at the top. Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
Yes, impressive. Okay. No, I think she passed out. Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Doreen Dorfman, and I have served Vermont schools, public schools as a teacher and principal since 1995. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the needs of Vermont students in literacy, for considering the newly introduced bill S-204, an act relating to reading assessment and intervention. It was only in 2019 that I became acutely aware of the scope and depth of reading problems in our state when I was a learning plan coordinator for students outside of special education. These dear students had mental health and behavior problems. They had attention deficit disorder and emotional disturbance, and most of them could not read. They could not learn in academic subjects and were being passed along. A deep dive into their cumulative files revealed that their reading deficits had been noted since preschool or kindergarten, when they did not know all their letters or letter sounds, and it grew worse from there. Students and parents came out of the woodwork to me asking for help, and some finally received appropriate screening as high school seniors. In response, I pursued my third graduate degree in education to become a reading specialist, where I learned to teach structured literacy. I needed to be part of the solution for 95% of Vermont children to read on grade level, from the mere 33% we have now. I'm very proud to do my part in my third year at the Barre Unified Union School District, teaching middle school students metalinguistics and watching them grow. Structured literacy is grounded in scientific reading research that has been validated across thousands of studies around the world. The curriculum and instruction is direct, explicit, systematic, and cumulative in teaching phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and reading comprehension. Some people would like to believe that our children, in fact, can read, that the tests are the problem. They just don't measure what our Vermont students can do. I am stating here and now that the tests are accurate. We have years of results from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Program, which I know is no longer in use, and local assessments like Renaissance Star, Track My Progress, NWEA Math, and others. These tests all indicate significant reading deficits in our student population, though these do not provide prescriptive recommendations for instruction. Teachers need highly precise data to tell them what to teach, and that's what S204 is all about. I urge you to go into any school and experience what most of our teachers are enduring every day. Come in and watch children try to write a complete sentence, try to spell a multisyllabic word. Go to any grade level. Look at our students' handwriting, their keyboarding skills, their grammar and mechanics. Ask them to read aloud to you, to spell common words and academic vocabulary, and you will feel the urgency for change that I am talking about. You may watch them look at the first letter, guess the rest, and then look at your face to see if they got the word right. They may be looking at the pictures for clues because they can't decode. They've internalized the debunked 3 cueing system. S204 will bring this practice, which is still widespread in our state, to a halt. I have assessed high school students without learning plans who did not know all the letter sounds in just our 26 letters, not to mention all 44 speech sounds in the English language. I have measured secondary students whose phonemic awareness was stuck at the first grade level. Students' spelling shows gaps in phonological awareness, not even understanding the sounds within words, confusing k and g and unable to recognize syllables in words, and too often lost in orthography, unable to spell United States of America, or suffixes such as chum, us, and chur. Last spring, I visited Hazelhurst and Jackson, 2 of the poorest communities in Mississippi, which lies among the most impoverished states in our country. I went because of the tremendous growth in elementary school reading performance, moving from the bottom in 2000 to tying with Vermont in 2022, ranking 21st for 3rd grade reading. I also went because I was tired of hearing Vermonters list all the barriers to students learning to read on grade level, without reflecting on our gaps and instructional practices that prevent many children from learning. As a principal for 11 years, I did not know about reading science, and so I could not help my students, and Lord knows, I tried, as my many colleagues can attest. In Mississippi, I observed literacy instruction and intervention, as well as interviewed school and state leaders. I brought home 10 findings to share with colleagues in Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire, which you can read in my attached report. Mississippi's children have nearly 3 times the poverty rate of Vermont's, 28% to 10% in 2022. But their low-income students outperform our low-income students by 10 points on the NAEP. Their middle high income students in Mississippi score 9 points higher than their Vermont counterparts here. We have much to learn and a lot to do for our children. What will S204 do to help? First, it requires scientifically based screening in the foundations of reading, as found on pages 2 and 3 of the bill. A more detailed description of each of these measures can be found attached to this testimony. When screeners are scientifically valid and reliable, different teachers administering them to the same child will measure the same skills and will arrive at the same results. Administered within the first 30 days of school, the screeners remove the guesswork and flag K through 3 students to immediately receive targeted reading instruction. This is the optimal time neurologically for reading development. This can avoid the very expensive, years-long remediation required to address the same deficits later on. Remember that vocabulary growth after 3rd grade mostly comes from reading, so you can just imagine the gaps in oral language and academic competencies experienced by our struggling readers in upper elementary and secondary school, which can be further exacerbated by the well-documented association between poor reading, anxiety, and depression. Kindergarten and 1st grade students unable to make progress despite evidence-based instruction will be administered a dyslexia screener. Key to S204 is that all students with reading deficits will receive explicit targeted instruction in the areas of weakness. For example, students with poor phonemic awareness, so that's when I was saying k and g and can finally progress in reading and spelling because their underlying deficits will be successfully remediated. I want to call attention to page 4 in the bill, section D. On line 7 it reads, each student who exhibits a substantial deficiency in reading at any time just move it down. Okay, now jump to line 10, where it continues about students above 3rd grade. I will repeat and then continue. Each student who exhibits a substantial deficiency in reading at any time through statewide end-of-year assessments shall be given intensive general education reading intervention immediately following the identification of the reading deficiency. So we're not talking about a disability, we're talking about reading gaps. Now we're talking about grades 4 through 12. This is a great provision of the bill because we can't ignore these kids. We should never say, sorry, you're too old to get help. Instead, S204 says, we see your struggle, we're going to teach you to read and write at grade level and invest in the future you deserve. Many of these students have no diagnosis and may not qualify for special education, but this bill is not about labeling. This is about learning to read, the most important skill that schools worldwide teach to children and secure for their next generation. If passed, the other provisions of this bill would be very helpful. The Vermont Agency of Education vetting screeners based on reading science and covering the cost of purchasing and managing data will support our schools' success in administration and reporting. Communicating with parents and guardians straight away, involving them in developing a reading improvement plan, describing the instructional services designed to remedy identified areas of reading deficiency, and learning ways to help at home will improve student reading skills. However, Vermont can do more than require screening, as our teachers need training in the foundations of reading in order to correctly apply student data to their teaching and flex their instructional strategies if students fail to make progress, to make gains. Our educator preparation programs have a colossal role to play in preparing our new teachers to experience student success on day one and live the joys of teaching children to read as I do now, keeping them dedicated to the field. We have fine examples in other states and in Ontario of what we can do, and S204 is a fine starting point. I'd be happy to answer your questions about this bill, about reading science, and what more Vermont can do. Thank you.
Great. So there are great testimony. One thing that I have to say I particularly appreciate that we do hear it, sometimes directly and indirectly in this committee, is, it's hard to teach poor kids. And I think what I appreciate is you getting rid of that and reminding us that, you know, honestly, it's, the poorest communities in Mississippi have done this. And the poorest communities in Vermont can do this because it is in our culture a little bit, oh, that district, that it's poor, we can't get there or whatever. And I appreciate you highlighting your trip and that experience. Because one of the things, you know, for me personally, it's so much that person in the classroom and whether or not he or she wants to be there and if they're trained to be there, it makes a huge difference.
Talking about the adults.
The adults, yeah.
Training is essential, but it really keeps you engaged as an educator.
Has
When
to, right?
you see the children grow,
Yeah,
when you see them learn before your eyes.
Yeah. yes, and do it.
And I just want to thank you for bringing that up
Yeah.
because and I know Dr. Dorfman's familiar with the Burlington School District and I'm on the school board there and it's something that we've been trying to tackle for years is, you know, reducing and narrowing the achievement gap and the opportunity gap. And to me, this gets to the heart of that. And this will help us achieve that goal.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah, great. The only other thing that I would point out that I really appreciated is you know, when I look at my little cheat sheet that I developed over the summer, when you see these districts in high school and kids can't read, that we're not abandoning them after third grade. And I know that there are very vibrant, lively, important tutorial centers, even in my district, where adults are being tutored. And so it has to, for sure, continue. Yeah, please, Ms. Carmoli.
I thought of one more thing as you were speaking, the almost last line, so line 9 on the back page of the bill, lines 8 and 9, it says, 7, some students may require intensive supplemental instruction tailored to the unique difficulties encountered, which a school reading specialist shall provide. Some of Act 173 says it's the person with the most expertise, but they may not have a reading specialist endorsement. So we may want to make some room for, it may be a special educator who has intensive reading training, but not yet at that reading specialist endorsement. So I just want to bring forward that I don't want to create a situation where we don't have the personnel for it.
I would like to create a situation where we need to train thousands of teachers.
Oh, I would love more training.
So I hear your point. I can't say I agree. I think that the expertise in the Barre School District of people who are licensed to teach reading has turned the district around. And we are all helping classroom teachers. We're all helping the principals. We're providing professional development. We're not only teaching our children. It's a game changer when you have people with that expertise. And a special educator who has the training can move in that direction.
But they may not have that reading specialist endorsement. So if it's read.
So that's what I'm saying, to move in the direction to receive that, especially because it would be too bad if that special educator got loaded with case management and paperwork instead of teaching reading.
Yeah, I would love to do that. So maybe reading specialty / specialist or something.
Well, we can hammer these
Yeah.
sorts of things
Yeah,
out.
I know
Yeah.
time is of the essence.
Yeah.
Yes.
but I-
Senator Bueller,
sorry.
go ahead.
I do think it's important for us to find out what does it take to get an endorsement to be a reading specialist, because I actually hadn't really thought about that, but that's important for us to look at. Yeah, and how can we support that?
Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happened in Barre?
Sure.
Yeah, just give us a little bit more background.
I can only talk about my
Your own,
work
yeah,
as
yeah.
a teacher there. I was hired because I had Orton Gillingham associate level training. I was still, I had to get a provisional license because I wasn't done with my program, but I had enough teaching, I had enough credentials for them to bring me on. And I received the full support of my principal. We are 2 reading specialists serving, so this middle school 5-8 is 315 students. And we have too many students who we can serve. And so we are working with the ELA teachers to work with the students. The same kind of work is happening. I'm in Barry Town, it's also happening in Barry City. Spalding High School started a course this year for students who are unable to read. It's called structured literacy, so they hired a full-time reading specialist to work with the students who I am working with, different students, but grades 5 through 8, to address that very thing.
So Dr. Dorfman, would you recommend, in terms of so we're going through this training, we're doing all these things, but in an ideal world, are you saying what we need is making sure that every school has somebody in that school that is a real expert that can go from teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom?
That's the Mississippi model.
That's the Mississippi.
They hired scores of coaches. They have coaches at the department level, at the local district level. They have coaches from the Barksdale Institute, which originally funded the initiative to improve reading. So that is, yes,
Teaching teachers how to teach reading.
yes.
Okay. Yes.
However, you know, my credibility is what the growth my colleagues see in my students. Just to come in and like I have actually not a lot of interest in being a reading coach. I want to teach kids how to read. That's why I might turn my career in a different direction instead of continue on.
You want to be with the students.
I want to, because the joy of watching children learn to read is unmatched in anything else I've done.
Sarah, she.
So to become licensed or certified in this area, you have to be a teacher, right? Or can you be like a paraeducator, or what are?
It's a licensed teacher.
Licensed
It's an
teacher.
area of endorsement.
And that endorsement, I mean, I'm curious about barriers to getting that endorsement, because I know that, obviously getting a master's degree in education to become a teacher, it's expensive and it takes a long time. And so these other endorsements, do you know of any barriers that need to be changed or should be changed? Or, is there any is it cost prohibitive for any teachers who are trying to attain that endorsement?
I think it varies depending on what their prior credentials are. If they're already a special educator, then to get an endorsement in another area, there's, like, for example, I'm not a special educator, but in my case, there were the courses I was taking in my graduate program, and I had to take 1 or 2 more courses to satisfy the criteria laid out by the agency of education. So it varies. And the 2 districts where I worked, Barry and the previous, I was entitled to a certain amount of course credit reimbursement, and that took care. I didn't really spend any money personally because of the
investment from them.
investment of the districts. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Just
go for it.
briefly respond to that. It does cost money to get endorsements, and then it does cost money to re-up your endorsement every, is it 8 or 10 years? Every 5 years. And also there's a lot of paperwork involved every time you re-up. So it is, there are barriers. Let's be honest.
Right, not every district can pay for those kinds of services,
Yeah,
and
and in
people
terms of-
don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are inequities in the system because there are some approved independent schools that don't require licensure in their teachers. So we also have that strange bifurcated system, but just letting you know that there are barriers.
Dr. Dorfman, if you're a parent and you're watching this and you're thinking, gosh, I would love to be able to play a role in my child's experience, what sorts of training is it possible for a parent to go through some kind of training so that they know, when Sally comes home, they might do X, Y, and Z?
So when Sally comes home from school.
Well, comes home from anywhere, you name it. She's
So
home.
So I think the responsibility
Yeah.
of teaching children to read
Yeah.
lies with the school and the
Absolutely.
teachers. And part of S204 is recommendations for parents to supplement what the school is doing. Supplement's not even a good word. I would say more support.
Okay.
So, for example, when parents ask
Yeah.
me, how can I support my child? I say I will recommend 5 different books that the student can read, but the parent has a copy of the book. So the student will take home 2 copies of the book, and the parent will commit to 10 or 20 or 30 minutes to read every day
Yeah.
and give immediate corrective feedback while their child reads. So the child
So
is
there are-
reading aloud,
Yeah, yeah,
and the parent is not doing the dishes or
Sure.
something, but they're sitting right next to them and saying, go back, look at that word again, let's sound out this word. What's that word mean? And if they want to go further and look it up, that kind of thing, they certainly can. But that corrective feedback is a very effective strategy.
because, frankly, there are kids, as we know, in 9th grade, schools where reading levels are very, very, very low. So parents, I appreciate what you're saying, it's the school's responsibility, but parents may not, they may very well want to play a role. So what is that role
So
for
that's
parents?
one
Yeah.
clear example of how a parent can help. But in terms of completing worksheets,
Yeah.
Students have to get corrective feedback immediately.
Okay.
And hopefully the parent is in a position to, and for students who are in this situation, whose reading is poor, parents hopefully can read at that level that their child is.
Great point.
So,
Or caregiver, have a lot of.
Yeah.
yes,
Great
of
point.
course.
Does Barry involve parents in a way that we should know about in some,
I do. I mean, I can't
understand how
speak
Dr.
for my
Brookman,
colleagues.
I'm wondering though, okay, so that would be the answer. So you do, tell us how is this what you say to all your parents? Go home, read,
When parents request.
okay, so
I
it's
do
not
not
a
have an
uniform kind of thing.
expectation of any parent to teach their child to read. That is not appropriate.
Questions? Anything else? This has been really terrific. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you.
I would add one more
Yeah.
thing on the
Yeah.
parent engagement part. Any school that receives Title I funding has a responsibility of parent engagement, so it could be some training on some activities or some suggestions, and we receive federal funds for that, specifically
Right.
set aside. It can be for a number of different ways to use it, but they're highly supportive of us working with caregivers to support reading.
I appreciate your administrative hat.
Yeah, that's really
Because I'm
helpful.
definitely.
It's a village.
in
We
the
are
classroom.
all working on this good work.
Absolutely.
And Jay, thanks also for your
Absolutely.
feedback earlier.